Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Cajun Night News Drops. I am your host, the Cajun Knight, Jacob Mook. Now let's get into it. Our story for today actually goes to one of my favorite places on earth. I've never been there, but I am an insane fan of their culture, their music, their architecture, and their fighting. I am, of course, talking about the nation of Myanmar, formerly called Burma under the British Empire. The nation of Myanmar has been wrought with civil war and genocide over the past few years, and it seems as though the tensions in the country may be coming to a conclusion. However, that may or may not be the best thing at this time. Personally, I really hope that this situation gets resolved quickly because, as I said, this country is one of my favorites on earth, specifically for their brutal fighting style known only as Letway. For anybody that doesn't know, Letway is one of the most brutal fighting styles on earth. It is very akin to Muay Thai with some distinct differences. For anybody who's never heard of Letway, let me explain. It is very akin to Muay Thai. Muay Thai has 8 striking points that you can make, right? It's the art of 8 limbs. Letway is known as the art of 9 limbs. Your head is also allowed. Headbutts completely allowed. The knockouts in this sport are absolutely insane. Oh, you just saw all of the mist come off that guy's head with that hit. They are only using gauze and tape on their hands. It is basically bare knuckle Muay Thai, again with headbutts. Also worth mentioning that there is not any stoppage for any reason. Like, one knockout does not stop the fight. As a matter of fact, 2 knockouts stops the fight. Or a towel being thrown in, as you just saw that gentleman's team do just there. In this video, we actually get to see a lot of those headbutts being used. Watch this guy come in. It's a brutal sport. He's taking these hits and he's like not even feeling it, and then he closes the deal. Bayow, that's it, son. You out. You are out. So for my own reasons, I genuinely do love this country. And again, not just because the fighting, the food is amazing, the culture is amazing, the music is amazing. Everything about this place is very old, very ancient, and very off the beaten path. They have a culture that is very particular to their area of the world. That being said, the country has been wrought with civil war and genocide in the past few years. And like we said a minute ago, this may be coming to a conclusion, but is that really the best thing? Let's discuss. On the one hand, we have a literal cabal of generals and military leaders led by the man named Min Aung Hlaing. I'm probably mispronouncing that, my apologies. He is the chairman of the State Administration Council. Essentially, he understands the fact that his country is so far off the beaten path that most people don't even understand what's going on there, and he has used that fact to rule his country under an iron fist of fear and intimidation to get the results he wants. On the other side, we have a group of militia and quote-unquote terrorist organizations that have combined forces to create what is now called the Three Brotherhood Alliance. By the way, there's more than 3, but it's like the 3 top ones that culminated calling it what it is. The 3 main ones are who kind of named it. And they have currently been going town to town, village to village, liberating the country from the military junta who is in charge of the oppressive regime over this country. Slowly but surely, the rebel groups have pushed the army back into the capital city, and now they've gotten to where they have nowhere else to run. But why would they be running? They have the military advantage, they have the weapons, they have everything else. Why would they run rather than fight? For today's episode, I'm not going to be doing too much of a deep dive of the generations of insurgent groups that have been operating in this country, or the history of the military junta and how and why they got to the position they're in. If you would like for me to do a more in-depth video on that, then by all means let me know in the comments. I would be happy to do so. But for today, let's stick on the main topics and how it's gotten to the point where we're having this conversation today. And the reason why I'm saying that is because, quite simply, there is no clear-cut good or bad guy in this situation. Okay, if you look at the military junta, they have been oppressing and genocidally murdering the Rohingya Muslim minority group in Myanmar for years now. However, one of the groups of the Brotherhood Alliance is equally racist against the Rohingya Muslim group, and they themselves have been enacting their own brand of genocide on this group. So it's not like there's any necessarily good guys or necessarily bad guys. It's more like the oppressive regime might be getting swapped out for a populist regime, but that doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to get better for the country as a whole. I know that off first glance, most people, myself included, would look at the rebel groups and be like, yeah, good for y'all, taking out the government oppression. But when you learn more about the rebel groups themselves, yes, there's 1 or 2 of them that are obviously bad, but it's like all of them have skeletons in their closet. All of them are tied into groups that they shouldn't be, including the military junta, and clearly there is no good or bad guys. No one's hands are clean in this situation. In 2021, the general and his military junta enacted a military coup and took out of power the elected official Aung San Suu Kyi, who in and of herself has many levels and is not exactly a clean-cut character in the first place. But when the general took over with his military and the force behind them, they tried to turn Myanmar, the jungle, into a police state. This did not go over well with the other militia groups, of which there's over 100 in the country. The rebel groups decided to join forces and go against the military junta, which has led to the widespread civil war across the entire country over the last few years. The army, currently known as the Tatmadaw, is organized in some way, shape, or form, but not to the level of what you would think as a Western military-industrial complex. When they took the country, they also took over major cities all throughout and set up military outposts throughout the country as well, as a way to kind of quell resistance and rebellions that would spring up inevitably. Through the military outposts throughout the big cities and all of the outposts that they set up throughout the countryside, along with the indiscriminate air raids and bombings of anybody they deem to be a political dissident, they have been able to keep the country at bay for the most part until recently. Now let's talk about the rebel groups, the Three Brotherhood Alliance. And again, there's over 100 militias that are involved with this, but let's go over the top three that gave it that name in the first place. They are the Arakan Army, the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, and the Ta Ang National Liberation Army. The three combined forces in 2019 when they were actually already fighting independent wars against the Tatmadaw, later becoming the military junta, before they took over the country. When the military junta took over in 2020, the Three Brotherhood Alliance actually did not immediately wage war. Instead, they went into the jungle and they recruited thousands and thousands of new members and trained them up before they actually started their attacks. This actually turned out to be a very wise move because the junta started to go all over the country and spread themselves very, very, very thin and started skirmishing with any of the other numerous rebel groups in the country. So by the time that the Three Brotherhood Alliance actually consolidated their forces and were one united front, the junta was already not in the best position and in a little bit of a state of chaos. In October of last year, the Three Brotherhood Alliance launched Operation 1027. Operation 1027 was the initial launch of the attack that is still waging today. The Three Brotherhood Alliance have not stopped pushing on Operation 1027, which has led to the junta being on the back foot currently. It's really nothing new for the Brotherhood Alliance because they are already used to fighting in asymmetrical warfare in the jungle. The military junta, although they are local military, really cannot keep up with rebel fighters who utilize the jungle to their advantage, not just for cover and concealment, but also as a way to attack and evade capture at a moment's notice. It makes it a perfect environment for ambush type situations, i.e., look at us in Vietnam. Myanmar's national unity government, still led by the elected official, operates in secret. She is in hiding and the government is still making contact with other countries around the world and speaking with the rebel groups outside of the military junta's knowledge. However, when it comes to who holds true power in the country at this moment, the military junta is still in charge. When Operation 1027 took off, a lot of these other rebel militia groups throughout the country took the advantage and launched their own attacks on the military junta in their regions. So it's not just one consolidated effort that's going against them. Basically, every group is launching attacks on them and they really can't keep up their defenses. Now, as far as the loyalty of the military junta to their leader, let's explain how this civil war has happened, how the battles have played out, and why. The soldiers that are fighting in the military junta currently are loyal to their leader, for sure. But they also are very, very clear that they would rather live to see tomorrow than die for their cause today. It makes it an option available for them to retreat rather than stand and die fighting. This is something that we've actually seen them rinse and repeat multiple times throughout the last year. What essentially happens is this. A military outpost will be manned by a contingent of the Myanmar military members, right? Got you. The rebel groups will come up in a large swarm, and it will be very clear that they will overtake this position. Rather than the military junta members fighting to the last man and trying to defend their position, they just get in their trucks and roll out to another location because they see it as a net loss, and they would rather let that net loss not have bodies associated with it if they can help it. And while for a manpower shortage issue, I understand why you would want to save as much manpower as you can, If you have a military that refuses to fight to defend what you've told them to fight and defend, you're not going to hold on to your territory for very long. Once that happens to one outpost, the word spreads. Next thing you know, outpost number 2. They're hearing reports that outpost number 1 was overtaken and that the rebel forces were able to do it with little to no effort on their end whatsoever. They're just blazing a trail through. So whenever they hear word that the rebels are coming close to their location, they just hop into their Jeeps, they hop into their Technicals and their Isuzus and their Toyotas, and they head out to the next location and just leave the military outpost unmanned. The rebel groups then make their way in, take over, blast it all over the social medias and the internet, and it looks like the rebel groups have won not one, not two, but dozens of victories, major victories on their push to the capital. The downside of that is that while the military junta's numbers are about what they've been this whole time, their forces are more and more and more consolidated into certain areas. That makes it more of a prime target for the rebel groups to attack, but it also gives the military junta a great launching platform to launch counterattacks. But again, once that same process has been repeated time and time and time and time again, you look up and the rebels pretty much have the entire country under their control now. This process continues through from the outpost to the military installation to regional headquarters, and now it's to a point to where it can no longer be ignored. The downside to that is also that when the military junta takes off from their locations, their command outposts, their regional command centers, they will leave all of their artillery and heavy equipment so that they can save their own skin and make it out okay. The problem is that the rebel groups do not know how to use artillery. They don't know how to use advanced weapon systems, so the military junta is not worried about the rebel groups using these high-end artillery rounds or high-end equipment against them. The Brotherhood Alliance typically does asymmetric warfare and ambush operations, so it typically is just left out there in the sun. There has also been prisoners taken, including some generals from the military junta who were unlucky enough to be at those regional command centers when the rebel groups took them over. Morale in the military junta is at an all-time low because, again, they've been retreating for months. They've seen so many of their members get captured as POWs. It's to a point now to where the military junta members do not even have the morale or the motivation not only to launch a counteroffensive, they don't even have the motivation to defend the land they're currently standing on. They would much rather retreat and go into the jungle to hide and fight another day than to actually defend their outposts and have any type of defensive posture. Right now, as a matter of fact, we're going to go ahead and show you a map of Myanmar, and all of the different colors are all of the different areas of control throughout the country. And as you can see, there is not just a few. There's not just 3 or 4 or 5. We're talking about somewhere between 15 and 20, and this is just what's on the map. On the ground, the dividing lines are more akin to religious, ethnic, and cultural lines that we really can't see clearly on a map. The New York Times recently released an article saying that Myanmar is a kaleidoscopic array of competing influences, fiefs, democratic havens, and drug lord hideouts. Now, what do they mean by drug lord hideouts? Put a pin in that one. We will be coming back to it very soon. As of right now, it is believed that maybe 1/3 of the country is actually under the control of the junta. The other 2/3 are under control of the rebel groups. What's interesting is that each of these rebel groups control an area of the country's border to another country. The Iraqi army, for instance, controls the entire area of the Bangladeshi border. The Karen National Army also controls most of the border with China. They're one of the other big militia groups I talked about that aren't technically a part of the original 3 that founded the 3 Brotherhood Alliance. However, they are one of the militia groups that have joined up since the insurrection. The Chin and the People's Defense Force also control most of the border with India. As of right now, the military junta owns a little bit of the border with Laos and most, if not all, of the southern coastline border of the country. However, it is expected that within the next few months, those areas will be cut off and slowly but surely taken over by the rebel groups. Now, I don't want to make it seem like that's all they have left to do here, because the fact of the matter is that up until this point, forcing the military junta to retreat and retreat and retreat has been relatively the easy part, because once they had the ball rolling, that momentum kind of carried itself. Now that the military junta has been able to consolidate into 3 strategic areas, they have been able to set up all types of defenses to prevent the rebel groups from taking over here in the next few weeks. Now, it's up in the air if that will even matter or not, because up until this point, the military has ran and ran and ran from so many different directions, from so many different outposts, that that's kind of what they do now. It will be very interesting to see that once forced to do nothing but stand and fight, when you have no more land to retreat to, will they actually stand and fight? If they do have at least some chance of holding out against the rebels, But at that point, it will become siege warfare, and it will only be a matter of time and a slow grind of attrition to see who will actually come out on top. So now we move into this crazy area of warfighting where the numbers are about what and what. It is very unlikely that the military junta could outman the rebel groups at this moment. However, they have a lot of something called force multipliers. That would be artillery, mortars, and types of weapons that can do a lot more damage than one guy with a rifle. The military junta having way more force multipliers on their side may become more of an advantage for them if they find the motivation to stand and fight. Now, as I brought up earlier, this would devolve into siege warfare. However, when you look at the location of these areas that the military junta is currently occupying that may become the points of contention to become a siege, it's not like they would only be able to last a few weeks. They would probably be able to last a few years. Now, we don't know what any of the rebel groups' plan of attack is for these areas, but we know for sure that they are not talking about launching some sort of a full frontal assault that would cost tens of thousands of lives on both sides. They're going to be smart about this. They're going to be strategic about it, but they're also being extremely tight-lipped about what their plan of action is. However, there are three main options that seem to be the most likely courses of action for them. Let's go over them now. Myanmar gets influenced by a more powerful neighbor that squashes this whole thing before it goes any further. More than likely, China. However, I really don't think China's going to be trying to get involved in something that doesn't directly affect them. They may claim that they don't like contention on their borders. However, when you look at the land that China has slowly but surely moved in and occupied in the last few decades, it's not really crazy that China would see this as an opportunity to try to flex their influence to their neighbors to the south. To further that aim, China has been supplying military weapons and aid to the military junta, as well as groups that they knew would be doing business with the Three Brotherhood Alliance. China has been funding and helping both sides of this conflict the entire time. Why would they do that? What benefit would it have for them, except to cause chaos to their border to where they may need to come in for further intervention and lead to them long-term occupying that area of the world? They've done it before, absolutely. Although I should make mention that China has been actually more helpful to the Three Brotherhood Alliance because they have helped to crack down on a fraud scheme that has been based out of Myanmar, which has stolen billions of dollars from Chinese citizens over the last few years. But don't get it twisted, China has absolutely played both sides of this conflict since day one. To further that point, China actually, just as of time of recording, told the military junta that it would actually help them run a census and run an election in the upcoming year, while gently brushing off the accusations that they have been feeding money and weapons to the Three Brotherhood Alliance the entire time. First option, sub-addendum, Chinese boots on the ground. Now, I don't mean actual military surges into Myanmar from the Chinese regular army. What I'm thinking is more along the lines of taking off the uniforms and badges of some very elite troops and fighter pilots and sending them into Myanmar to kind of enact certain things from the inside out and make it seem like China needed to step in a bigger way. We could look towards Crimea in 2014 of what Russia did as an example of this. These unidentified mercenaries, they just come in strategically, don't they? First option, second addendum. China does an entire frontal assault into Myanmar and claims to the world that it is being done for humanitarian reasons. While they run through and completely decimate the rebel groups, they continue in and decimate the military junta and basically just take over and occupy this country as occupied Myanmar. The same way that they have Chinese-occupied Tibet, Chinese-occupied Mongolia, Chinese-occupied Nepal, and Chinese-occupied India. China may also see that as a way to train their troops for a bigger military assault that they may have somewhere else on Earth. The thing is, nothing really replaces real combat as far as training your troops go. Everybody learned that with Russia. Everybody was so worried about Russia invading Ukraine because they're one of the biggest militaries on earth, except no one acknowledged that no member of the Russian military, from the lowest private to the highest general, had been shot at in the last 60 years. When they invaded Ukraine, everybody thought it was going to be an absolute walkthrough. Then they realized how much of a paper tiger Russia really was. The reason being, no actual combat experience could be found within the Russian ranks. Currently, everybody is worried about China for the same reason. Oh, they're so big. They have the world's largest military. They have the world's largest navy. Until you look and see that most of those naval assets are regular fishing boats that the Chinese government took, registered, and now it is a Chinese military naval vessel, even though it's more of a fishing boat. Couple that with the fact that China has no problem losing 1 billion people tomorrow for any reason whatsoever, and you got yourself a recipe for a real problem. However, let's keep in mind, China is in the same boat that Russia was a few years back. No one of the Chinese military has actually seen real combat in a very long time. The closest example we have to Chinese military members seeing combat was a fist fight that broke out between India and China not too long ago.
Rare video of a border clash between Indian and Chinese troops has gone viral on social media. The video came to light after a clash occurred on December 9th in northeastern India's Arunachal Pradesh state near the border with Tibet. India said several soldiers were injured.
Obviously, China invading Myanmar is seen as the least likely option fielded currently, but let me propose another option to you. What happens if the siege lines get set up and the rebel forces don't attack? They sit there and wait for the military junta to make the first move, and it basically becomes a stalemate DMZ situation. What happens then? When I said earlier that the military junta's morale was low, that was a bit of an understatement. They haven't eaten in weeks. They haven't gotten medical care or supplies in weeks. So basically, if they were to fall into a siege type situation, I could see a couple of different options happening, to be honest with you. Most of the military junta were pressed into service. Most of them didn't want to fight in the first place, and these are the same guys that have been retreating time after time after time. When they finally get to a point to where they can no longer retreat, will they actually have the backbone to stand and fight, or they mutiny against their generals and basically throw them to the wolves as a way to save their own skin? It's also possible that the cities that are currently being hailed by junta control also would just have their own revolt happen internally. February of this year, the military junta came out and said that they will open more conscriptions and send thousands of more Myanmar citizens to the front lines, potentially to their death. Keep in mind, people that had no interest in joining the war in the first place are now being forced to go there, and then they're retreating back. I see it as extremely possible that the local inhabitants of these cities turn on the military junta, even though they are being ruled out of fear right now, and revolt against them and kick them out of the country altogether. So let's recap on the 3 main options available to them at this time to break this line. A, outside resources from China. B, an internal uprising and revolt from the cities that are currently being occupied by the military junta. Or C, the rebel groups actually just break through the lines and take over by military might alone. Now, once the rebel groups take over Myanmar, they already have said that they would like to turn power back over to the National Unity Government, the democratically elected government that is currently on the outskirts because of the military junta. 9 out of 10 citizens say that they view it as a very positive government, and they would like to see it reenacted into the country once the military junta is taken out. Now, again, we have to question that source and question that poll, because as we look at these rebel groups who claim that they would back the National Unity Government, we have to keep in mind that every single one of the rebel groups operating in Myanmar is out for their own interests at the end of the day. One in particular that's a source of worry is the Arakan Army, the Araken. Here's the deal. The Arakan Army has taken on some of the more brutal aspects of the military junta, and they have waged their own genocide against the Rohingya Muslim population on the back end of all of this. With all this being said, and with all the chaos going on, let's think about this. What would be the main reason why this area is so important to the world, is so important to where China is even considering stepping foot in this country? It's not just for the land grab, and it's not just for the more votes and the more tax revenue. What would be so critical that it would make it worth it to China? Now, I would like to mention the fact that the UN this year has claimed that Myanmar is the #1 producer of opium in the world.
This sea of white flowers has become a lifeline for many farmers in chaos-ravaged Myanmar. Farmers cut small slits in the greenish-purple pods of poppies. The following morning, they collect the opium resin that has seeped out overnight. Opium resin is used to make heroin. Ong Mau tends to 3 acres of poppy flowers. He said he had grown the plant before, but not on such a large scale.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Big Pharma has entered the conversation with the Myanmar genocide and civil war that's going on. With that being said, what's going to happen? Are the rebel groups going to take over the poppy fields and enact their own system of government in their local autonomous regions, separate from the national unity government? Will China step in to enact their own will and power over these opium fields? Will a military junta finally gain a spine and start fighting back against the rebel groups that have pushed them all the way to the beaches? Will the rebel groups finally take out the military junta and give back the country to the national unity government, and then the country as a whole can benefit from these opium sales? Who's to say? All we know currently is that there's massive shifts going on in this country, and we will be giving you more news drops as the situation unfolds. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I am the Cajun Knight, and thank you for watching this episode. If you could please go down and hit the subscribe, hit the bell, hit the like, leave a comment. I read all of them, and I cannot wait to hear what y'all have to say about this one. I'll see y'all next time.